Have you ever felt scared around people you've worked with? I mean, I was scared sometimes when I broke De Niro's nose. Robin Williams was a comedic genius who could make people laugh so hard they were crying one minute and cry so hard they were crying the next. He had a surprisingly complicated relationship with his fellow performers that went far beyond his public image of endless kindness and childlike wonder. People outside of the entertainment business knew Williams as the hyperkinetic improvisational master who made every project better. But those inside the business knew that beneath his manic energy lay a fiercely competitive artist who held grudges against actors he thought were not deserving of their success or didn't see the artistic potential in comedy. Williams didn't dislike each other out of small-scale jealousy. They had deep philosophical disagreements about what entertainment is, what artists should be responsible for, and how American comedy has changed over time. His fights showed that he was a perfectionist who took his job seriously even when he gave performances that seemed very natural. He also got really angry at artists he thought were relying too much on tricks instead of learning how to be funny. These weren't just differences about work. They were strong beliefs about what made entertainers different from celebrities. His few but memorable fights showed the tensions between different generations of comedians, their different ways of connecting with audiences, and the constant battle between intellectual sophistication and populist appeal that shaped Hollywood's comedic environment during his entire career. Williams's dislikes were just as telling as his likes, showing that he was an artist who was always trying to figure out his place in the past of entertainment. Jim Carrey. Robin Williams's rivalry with Jim Carrey was one of the most interesting in comedy. It started when they had different ideas about how to make people laugh physically, and Williams grew increasingly annoyed by what he saw as Carrey's flat fake pranks. Both actors built their careers on crazy energy and changing physicality, but Williams saw Carrey's success as proof that audiences were becoming less sophisticated and more willing to accept cheap laughs over real comic artistry. You can see all three of Jim's faces in every movie. According to comedy writer Bruce Vilanch, Williams told a friend that when Carrey was at the top of her game in the 1990s, the tension got worse because critics and casting directors often compared the two actors, with Carrey getting roles that Williams thought needed more complex comedic skills. Carrey worked with Peter Weir on The Truman Show, and he remembered that Robin would say these mean things about Jim's range. She was saying that stretching your face wasn't the same thing as performing better. Williams really didn't like how Carrey's success with Ace Ventura seemed to support what he saw as lowest common denominator comedy. Their intellectual differences showed up in how they felt about improvising. Williams, who is great at making jokes and cultural references on the spot, thought Carrey's more planned physical comedy was boring and limited. Lorne Michaels, a comedy director, saw that Robin thought Jim was the worst thing about modern comedy because he was all technique and no soul. Williams was more worried about whether real comedic intelligence could compete with broad physical humor in Hollywood's market, which showed in the competition. Carrey showed that people would rather watch someone make faces than read what they're thinking. Williams shared a secret with another comic, Adam Sandler. Robin Williams' dislike of Adam Sandler stemmed from what he saw as Sandler's deliberate use of childish humor and his easygoing economic success despite having little range and sophistication. Williams was proud of his comedy that could make people think on more than one level. He thought Sandler's character of Arrested Growth was not only not funny but also hurtful to the art of comedy. This show is for people who think fart jokes are the funniest thing ever. Williams is said to have told his boss what he thought, according to stories from people in the business in The Hollywood Reporter. In the 1990s and 2000s, Sandler's comedies ruled the box office, while Williams's more serious movies had a harder time finding similar crowds. This made the rivalry stronger. Williams thought that Sandler's success was a big step backwards for American comedy because it rewarded laziness and immaturity over the quick-fire intelligence and cultural knowledge that Williams brought to his shows. Director Dennis Dugan, who has worked with Sandler on several projects, remembered that this made it harder for bigger comedy projects to do well. Producer Judd Apatow said that the feud between Robin Williams and Eddie Murphy was one of the most important generational and stylistic conflicts in comedy. It started when they were competing to be the best stand-up comedian, and Williams didn't like how easy it seemed for Murphy to become a huge commercial success. In the late 1970s, both Murphy and Williams started out as stand-up comedians. However, Murphy's big break on Saturday Night Live and later movie success made Williams's early projects look less important. Gerald Nachman, a comedy historian, says Williams told fellow comedian Billy Crystal, "Eddie walked into success that I had to claw and scratch for." Williams really didn't like how Murphy seemed to take his talents for granted. He thought Murphy's later career choices were a waste of real comedic ability in favor of quick money. The tension was clear when both comedians were considered for parts that required them to improvise quickly and change their characters many times. Bonnie Timmerman, the casting director, remembered that Robin would say mean things about Eddie's work ethic, implying that natural talent wasn't enough if you weren't ready to push yourself as an artist. They had different ideas about how to handle controversial material and social criticism because of their different philosophical views. Williams had a pretty clean comedic image, even though he was very active. Murphy's early work, on the other hand, had a lot of sexually explicit material that Williams thought was too crude. Murphy worked with director John Landis, who said the rivalry showed Williams' complicated relationship with his own business goals versus his artistic integrity. Murphy showed that people would rather be dangerous than wise. Williams looked like Steve Martin. The complicated relationship between Robin Williams and Steve Martin showed how worried he was about his academic credibility and the respect of the comedy establishment. Both Martin and Williams were comedians with interesting backgrounds and sophisticated, thought-provoking humor. However, Martin's smooth transition from experimental stand-up to mainstream success without giving up critical praise made Williams very angry. According to some, Steve is one of the few banjo players who is both liked and admired. Williams made a sarcastic comment to The New Yorker that showed how annoyed he was with what he saw as Martin's fake academic credibility. The tension got worse. Both Martin and Williams are comedians who want to play dramatic parts. Martin's roles in movies like Parenthood and Father of the Bride got the kind of praise that Williams wanted but rarely got. Williams thought that Martin's deadpan style and literary pretensions hid the fact that he wasn't really funny. Frank Oz, a director who worked with both actors on different projects, remembered that Robin would make sharp comments about Steve's planned approach to humor, saying that real comedy couldn't be planned out like a philosophy paper. Williams really didn't like how Martin went from being a little-known stage player to a famous author, because those were the kinds of accomplishments Williams had been looking for his whole career. They were rivals even when it came to their different relationships with people in the comedy business. Martin became a cultural commentator through his work in The New Yorker and his art collection, while Williams stayed in the category of entertainment. Lorne Michaels, a producer, said Martin persuaded people that being dull was the same thing as being smart, ended with a normal bite. Robin Williams' dislike for Chevy Chase was one of the ugliest personality conflicts in comedy. It came from Williams' moral anger at Chase's infamous haughtiness and rudeness toward coworkers throughout his career. Unlike Williams' other professional rivalries, which were based on artistic differences, his dislike for Chase was deeply personal. It came from seeing how Chase treated the collaborative spirit that Williams thought was important to great comedy with contempt. Williams told Rolling Stone that Chevy treats everyone like they're lucky to be with him. He forgot that the point of entertainment is to make other people laugh, not to make yourself look good. Williams' dislike for Chase grew after seeing him act badly at industry events and hearing a lot of stories from people they worked with about how unprofessional he was and how mean he was to other artists. Things got really bad in the war. When both of them were connected to Saturday Night Live, Williams thought Chase's lack of interest in the show and its cast members was insulting to the most important institution in comedy. If you worked with Chase, director Ivan Reitman remembered that Robin would freely ask Chevy how he kept his job when he had a reputation for being so hard to work with. Chase showed that it was possible to be successful as a comedian, even if you hated other comics. Williams looked at it with disgust, less moving. Robin Williams' dislike of Ben Stiller showed how upset he was with what he saw as Hollywood favoritism and how he felt about actors who get famous through links instead of coming up with new and funny ideas. Williams, whose success was built through hard-earned stand-up training and improvisational mastery, thought that Stiller's relatively smooth rise was due to the fact that both of his parents worked in the entertainment business. Ben was given chances that most of us had to work for by hitting and going to comedy clubs for years. Williams complained to Variety, which showed that he really believed that pain and struggle were necessary for comedy to be real. When both actors were competing for neurotic everyman roles in highbrow comedies, the tension rose. Stiller often won parts that Williams thought were better suited to his mix of manic energy and underlying weakness. Williams really didn't like Stiller's success as a director. He saw it as another example of how the industry favored well-connected insiders over real comic innovators. According to producer Scott Rudin, Robin would say mean things about Ben's ideas, implying that having famous parents was obviously enough to call yourself a filmmaker. Stiller showed that in Hollywood, it's more important who you know than what you can do. Williams thought about it with his usual anger. Williams's disagreements showed how deeply he felt about the artistic validity of comedy and his place in an entertainment industry that was becoming more and more marketed. His fights brought up deeper issues of intellectual versus populist comedy and showed an artist who was always battling for respect and economic success. Get more Hollywood feuds by subscribing.